So I really respect you guys a lot, but I'm going to be honest with you. That was the most delusional take on China I've ever heard. And I'll just go down the list of stuff off the top of my head. The tofu drag quality of construction in China is both dangerous and unbelievably poor quality. There's millions of people that haven't even gotten their apartments that they paid for. You only have 70 years, so you don't even own your property. And the ones that are completed are so dangerous that people move out of them all the time. The overwhelming amount of corruption in the country is so systemic that you can't do anything in China unless the Chinese Communist Party says so. Like, all of the companies have a CCP cadre in them, so there is no difference between the Chinese government and a Chinese company. Every single Chinese company on the planet is connected to the Chinese Communist Party, okay? Jack Ma had his company destroyed simply for criticizing the Chinese Communist Party one time, and he was completely removed from the public. Were destroyed. There was the biggest IPO that ever happened that was completely stopped by the CCP. The industrial scale of organ harvesting is something that is unbelievably, is the most amoral thing in history. And now that was imported to Canada because we have organ harvesting here now because of the MAID program. That is so abysmally amoral, and we're sitting in a place that is talking about morality and capitalism. This is one of the most amoral governments on the planet. The only thing that's more authoritarian on this planet is North Korea. The rise of China, like you said, and that was the only thing that I actually agree with, is specifically because the Western companies put their manufacturing into China and supported their rise. They only were allowed to do that because they were added to the WTO by Bill Clinton. If that didn't happen, we wouldn't even be talking about this because they would be basically an agrarian backwater. The industrial capacity of China was specifically created for multinational companies to make massive amounts of money and at the cost of Western manufacturing. So all of the jobs that we lost in the West went to China. And now, right now, their economy is collapsing because they had three pillars of their economy, which was real estate, foreign direct investment, and exports, all three of which are collapsing right now. The amount of people in China that are unemployed or completely poverty-stricken is the vast majority of the country. There is no world where this country, China, is better than the U.S. on any sort of metric. And to even suggest that they have a rule of law is completely delusional. There is no rule of law in the country because they basically say that if you go against the CCP, you get arrested and disappeared. And I have like a whole 2 pages of stuff with this.
Have you been to China? Have you been to China?
No.
Okay, so thanks. So there's a saying among people who have been to China and spent some time that there are people who have been to China and there are people who haven't been to China and they don't like it. So that's my response. I don't disagree with a lot of what you have said. There are a lot of bad construction in China. There's a lot of, I don't know what CCP does. But corruption is something that has actually reasonably disappeared from China. Now, I have been going to China for 16 years, and
as a tourist, do you live there?
I actually work. I do. I mean, I'm not going to go into much details there, but I have been going for 16 years, and for long-term, extended durations, investing, working, meeting people and companies.
So you worked with the government?
Sorry, I don't work for the government. No.
You worked with the government, right?
No, I don't.
So if you invested in China, right, in the last 20 years, you had to get permits from the government.
Listen, you're getting too personal here. I'm just, let's respond to major principal issues rather than getting into details of personal life, because that creates more problems. Again, you haven't been to China, and my question right now is, and I agree with a lot you have said, but my question is, are you a product of Washington and media propaganda rather than the reality?
Well, here's the reality. That there's basically 2 groups of people on the planet that are controlling and destroying everything. The Western oligarchs and Eastern authoritarians, of which the Eastern authoritarians in the East is basically the CCP.
Have you been to any of the third world countries?
No, I don't want to go to third world countries. Why would I?
Yeah, but listen, I mean, you're really comparing what you don't know with what you know. And then you can't really have a valid comparison.
So because you had a personal good experience that disregards all of the absolutely horrific things that people have to deal with on a daily basis in China?
The horrific things you are talking about, I haven't seen.
Okay, so because you didn't see them, they don't exist?
Yeah, but then you have to let me complete. You're getting emotional here.
I am. This is like
No, but
insane.
you have to listen to me. Chinese government is no saint. They are politicians and bureaucrats, and I have I'm a libertarian. I have no interest in them. I have to only compare the society with other societies that exist, and I can only compare it with countries like Uganda, Kenya, and India, because that is the peer countries for China. So that's what I'm comparing it with. Now, do one-child policy kind of things happen in Kenya, Uganda, and India? You're clueless because you haven't been to any of them. You haven't lived there. I grew up in one of those hellholes. They can kill millions of people, and nothing will ever come on page 3 of your newspaper. So you have to compare by a like-to-like basis, a statistically valid comparison. And all I'm saying is that, and I'm not even saying China did not do horrific things in the past. It did, and maybe it still does some horrific things, because maybe they control extremists to means that would not pass my approval. All I'm saying is that at the end of the day, they are improving rapidly. Culturally, they are improving rapidly. Economically, they are improving rapidly. And compared to what other third world countries have achieved, which is that they are getting worse with time, China has managed to become continually better. I think we should move on.
Yeah, well, if anybody wants to look at what's actually happening in China Observer and China Uncensored on YouTube, you can figure it out yourself.
Okay. This was for Dr. Cohen. To what extent should health of the many outweigh the personal medical choices of the individual?
Did I talk about that? I think this is on. I'm not exactly sure, what you are asking me, but I think. Okay.
So, because I let it broad, but let's talk about vaccine mandates.
Yes.
How the vaccine mandate is sold to the population, something good, the greater good, whether it's COVID vaccine or the immediate childhood vaccine, baby vaccine. So, how does that fit into the question?
It fits in rather well. I think you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. You may see that as a bit of a cop-out. But if you take the example of the measles vaccine, I think we have collectively forgotten that measles is a highly lethal disease. And with the measles vaccine, you can actually protect individuals and you can protect the many. We have examples of other vaccines that are at the opposite end of the spectrum where you simply cannot make that argument. I've heard here, over the course of the day, this notion of intrusion by the government, into your body and into your personal affairs. And I think that should always give us pause. I am not a fan of, I was not a fan of, and I will never be a fan of these sort of vaccine mandates. I believe in informed consent, and I think both individuals and communities can engage in informed consent as long as they understand what they're consenting to. And I think what's missing in the dialogue in the United States currently around measles vaccines is an abject failure of doctors to point out the obvious, which is that measles is awful. And it's awful for people that get it. It leaves behind a large number of brain damaged children. And we have an obligation as physicians to explain the risk benefit on an individual basis for each and every vaccine. It's hard work. And it requires data, and it requires the listener to understand the data that you're presenting to them. And I think people find it remarkably difficult, strangely, or perhaps not strangely, to understand risk-benefit analyses.
Thanks. Dr. Wax, is the legal complexity an inevitable reflection of human society, or could we strip it back without losing order and justice? And I can give more context. Actually, it was one of the first capitalism rallies I came to. Doug did a presentation.
Doug did a presentation. I don't want to simplify it too much, but essentially he said it could be almost like a one pager or a one liner. In fact, is he had. But I wonder, if thinking about it further, whether you could, like, do you think you could actually do that in human society, or is complex this innate dehuman?
Well, I think one of the problems we have in the United States today is the simple-mindedness of the elites. I would like them to acknowledge more complexity than they do. The whole takeover of the woke ideology, which is very crude and very overly simple and divides the world in a very Manichaean way, is really not worthy of our elites. I'm old enough, I'm in my 70s, to remember a time when elites didn't sign on to these simple-minded, lefty, emotion-driven notions, that they were more sophisticated and more nuanced. They had clear ideas about injustice and aspirations, universal aspirations and ideals, but they tempered that with reality about human nature and human agency. And they would attribute and ascribe responsibility to so-called victims. And they were able to hold seemingly contradictory ideas in their head at one time. I mean, I'll just give a very homely, down-to-earth example of that, which, rarely happens anymore. My parents were very serious Jews. They were observant Jews, one generation away from, the Pale. And they were very sympathetic to civil rights, very pro-civil rights, held a lot of attitudes that, Jews held about social justice and the like. And this is in the 50s and 60s when I was growing up. But at the dinner table, I remember a lot of serious discussions about the ways in which, let's say, Black people, which was the preoccupation, were their own worst enemy in a way. Some of their behavioral choices, their high crime rates, their disintegration of their family, their out-of-wedlock birth rate, their failure to study hard, or always to work as hard or as conscientiously as they should, and that some of their problems were obviously due to discrimination and racism, but other of their problems were due to their own behaviors. And that is, a recognition that the world is complicated, that there's no simple black and white explanation for everything. Well, now we've moved to the point where when groups do poorly, there's one and only one acceptable explanation, which is racism and oppression. Full stop.
Hi, thanks to everyone on the panel. I want to preface by saying my question is in no way meant to criticize Nigeria or Nigerians, but I was there 2 years ago, and I want to describe something that happened to me and ask the panel, could this happen in China, or is this coming to Canada or coming to the medical industry? So it's a really simple story. I was flying domestically from Port Harcourt to Lagos, Nigeria. I checked in, I went to the gate. The girl printed my boarding pass and it came out completely blank. And so she just looked at the computer and wrote, 6A or whatever my seat was on a blank piece of paper that was the shape of a ticket. And I asked her, I said, how long have you been having to do that? And she said, I don't know, ever since I worked here. So could that happen in China? Is that coming to Canada? Could it happen in the medical industry? Thank you.
Well, I don't know why you're reluctant to criticize Nigeria or Nigerians. I mean, this reluctance to criticize is rather mystifying, because there are things that might be worth criticizing in different countries and different places. I mean, Jay is willing to praise what is praiseworthy and criticize what is not praiseworthy. So if that's fine. I mean, Africa is a failed continent. Okay, there's no way around it. And, you know, we can speculate endlessly about why that is. I'm not going to go into all the details because it would take too many evenings, as they say about democracy. It's could be a million things. I think it is incumbent on us, though, to ask what is wrong in Africa. Well, I'll just mention one word, and it's not endemic only to Africa: corruption. When there is corruption, there is no hope. You cannot have nice things. You will not have nice things if you have corruption. And, you know, when the Brits ruled India, the Raj, there's a lot of bad stuff that accompanied that. But the one thing that even the Indians said about the Brits is they're incorruptible. They don't do corruption. And that was a major strength. That was so important. So you have to start looking for those things. You know, now that doesn't explain why people were so passive about this broken machine that prints out boarding passes. You know, just nobody stepped up and said, wow, we need to fix this. No, but I think these things are related.
That was a burden of yesteryear, though, I think. The next, another question. Does the state have a legitimate role to play inside the doctor-patient relationship?
And can you repeat the
Does the state have a legitimate role to play inside of the doctor-patient relationship? It's a problem we have in Canada anyways.
I think if the minute that the state got involved in paying for it, they had a role. So I'm old enough to remember our dinner table conversations about Medicare in 1965 and the emergence of Medicare, which was viewed by many physicians as abhorrent because it precisely allowed that to occur. And so the minute the medical profession made that bargain with the government was involved. And now it is highly involved in almost every single dimension, including documentation, as well as billing, what's in the medical record, what the medical record is used for. The government is not yet in the exam room itself, but that's coming soon because we're encouraged to use AI bots in our exam rooms to listen to our conversations with the patients and turn them into narratives. What's interesting is that dentists and ophthalmologists didn't sign on to Medicare, and so those practices in the United States retain some form of independence and dignity apart from the government. And you can tell, you know, when you're being cared for by a dentist or an ophthalmologist that they don't have the government hanging over them. This was a devil's bargain that was willingly made, and the minute it was done, it was terrible.
My question goes to Jayant. So I just came back from China. I can vouch for almost everything you said there. It's amazing. It's impressive. And I was so amazed that when I came back to Canada, I asked my colleagues that are from China that work with me, I said, what the hell are you doing here? I just visited a fantastic place, clean and safe and developed. And they all say the same thing. And it's the same thing that my Japanese colleagues say, that it's the work conditions, not that they are enslaved or oppressed, as just that it is hard work and you have to do extra hours without pay. So they immigrate because of that. And I would like to ask you if this is a sign of that they are not developed, or do you achieve work conditions like some Canadians.
I completely agree with that. If I had to work today, I would want to work in the West, not in China, because my salaries would be a quarter or less than a quarter of what they would be in the West. And I still prefer to live in the West. I'm in the West today and I live in the West because I still think it's better than China. However, the underpinning factors of higher order factors working in favor of China are such that I think it has a future to be the next America. Now, yes, people have to work long hours. People get a very small, maybe not much salary. And because I use my US dollars or Canadian dollars, my money goes a long way in China, 5 times more than it would in Canada. So yes, from that perspective, my perception is different. And I made it very clear that that was my side of perception. It is not necessarily the happiest moment for the other side, but that is how you grow. China was a shithole, even when I first started visiting that. So it was a hellhole. But you have to go through the process. When I was broke and I was hungry, and I've been twice broke and hungry in my life, I have been through the same process. I was prepared to work for virtually nothing, a few dollars an hour, maybe not perfectly legally. I tried to get out of it. Chinese are trying that, and this attempt is what matters to me, because go to Africa, 1.5 billion people, a complete hellhole from north to south. They will go hungry but won't work. They will slave their families. Crazy things happen. I don't want to say too much in a short time without having to qualify those. India, a complete hellhole, getting worse by the time. You might get paid about $3 for a day, a 12-hour work day. Now you have to compare what is happening in China compared with India. Today, a Chinese janitor can actually already start thinking about buying a car. In India, he is thinking about selling his bicycle because he can't afford food this evening. So that's the comparison we should keep in mind. There's a spectrum of values. There's spectrum of places where different countries exist in. What each country has to do is different. China cannot provide free medical care. They cannot provide a minimum salary. If they did that, they would become a disaster like Nigeria or India. So for what it is great. And I see this higher order factors, and this is where complexity comes in. You want to perceive the higher order factors working in favor of a country, which will take it forward. Now, do bad things happen in China? Absolutely. I've seen, 16 years back, I saw those city policemen beating up an old woman. Unfortunately, in human affairs, in any animal, at the end of the day, we are animals. We have base instincts. We are animalistic. We build civilization on top of it. As long as you are putting on bricks of civilization on your animalistic instincts, I'm all right. Europe went through horrible 2 wars, which were completely useless. In fact, there were more wars, 30-year war, 100-year war. They were useless wars from today's perspective, but I judge Europe from what it is today, and I want to judge China for what it is today.
Hey, Jayant. I'm over here. Yeah, please let me know if this question is too long, but a large part of China's success, I've realized, was the Chinese diasporas investing into China when they started the reforms and opening up. So ethnically Chinese people in Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Chinese Americans, Chinese Canadians, etc., investing in their ancestral homelands. So the poorest parts of China historically, Fujian, Guangdong, are now the wealthiest parts of China. Places like Guangzhou, Xiamen, Fuzhou, whatever, are extraordinarily impressive places. So China went from one of the poorest places on earth to now a pretty nice developing country. I've been there myself. It's great. I like it. It's a little too hot for my taste, but why, I understand IQ is a big factor, but why is it that the Indian diaspora can't seem to do it? Why is it that maybe other Asian diaspora groups haven't been able to do this? There's plenty of high earning Africans in the West. Why have they not been able to recreate that success?
Well, because those societies don't work. I have no reason to put a penny in India. because if I did, it would disappear. Whereas if I put my penny in China, even as a non-Chinese, I can make it work for me. Now, Chinese stock market hasn't really done much over the last 1 or 2 decades. And a lot of people measure success of an economy based on the stock market's performance. You should ignore, because the economic progress has been humongous in China. You have to create institutional framework for my penny to work for me. So in India, have you been to India?
I've not been to
Have
India.
you been to any of the hellholes?
Central America.
No, even Central America can be pretty much of a hellhole. You walk into a government office in India, it does not matter whose office it is, from a petty bureaucrat to the chief minister. The only question that is ever asked is about bribes. That's the only thing they're interested in. So you have to have an institutional framework, the rule of law, even if it's not my rule of law, even as long as it's the rule of law, because you can clean up that rule of law eventually. But making a jump from rule of man to rule of law is a multi-millennia long process. It's not a generation long process, a multi-millennia long process. So in short, my penny works for me in China. It works for me in the West. It does not work for me in Africa, in most of Latin America, certainly not in India. I would not put a penny there. I still have a few $1,000s worth of money left in India, and I want to take it out.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I will have a comment and also a question. But I believe that there's, I support like 3 investigative journalists, and one of them is a historian, and he said he wrote a book called The Clash of Two Americas. So there is a, good, and there is a very wicked or, corrupt element in, I think, every country or nation. But my question is, I would love, I have heard that it's very hard to sell your product in China because, that consumer base is so large. I would love to get, a product in there, but I've heard that it's very, very difficult, and this is what feels so unfair, but I could be wrong.
Sorry, is that
Yes.
Well, anyone that understands.
Why should I buy other products when other people are buying my products? As I said, most of the underwears here and most of the high-tech equipment here are made in China. So they are cheap, they are better quality. So how would you manage to buy a Tesla which is 2 or 3 times more expensive than a local electric vehicle in China, which works no worse? So there's just not any incentive. Now, are there Porsches and Toyotas and Rolls Royces in China? I see so many of those expensive cars in China. But the only reason I think Chinese buy it for their status value. Chinese are still emerging from this show-off culture. You watch this rich Asian people. It's still a backward mentality in many ways. So they would buy it. They would pay 3 times just for the brand. But I don't see a reason why I would pay for it.
Well, I think that there are products that are made here in Canada and America that we can say you really love to have the kind.
Yeah, I wouldn't dispute that Chinese government maybe puts border controls on import restrictions. I looked for it before I came to speak here because I didn't fully understand the import controls China has. I don't understand them. But at the end of the day, if mercantilism works for you, what's wrong with it? You are growing, you are progressing, you are growing, your society is improving. So if restrictions work, the only reason we believe in the free market is because free market does the best for the economy and people. If some abstract country can get away without free market and does all the good things, then that of course is the natural way you would adopt. So the question is, we should understand why China maybe they restricts imports of some products. I'm not denying it at all. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a government, and I don't want like governments. I don't like Chinese government. I'm only comparing governments to governments, and that's when a government of a third world country with a government of China, and that's when I get a positive feeling of it.
Thanks for all the great information. I had one little curiosity that because of the different areas that have been covered in each of the different talks and the complexities of governments to governments as we see them from the West to other regions. But based on your, let's say, deep knowledge in the specific areas you were talking about today, if you were to add something to, let's say, democracy, maybe make it a super tomography, some other word that, means it's better. And the ability to define that in those segments that you each spoke about, whether it's the accidental fall into Medicaid or whatever the situation is that you see might be an improvement to help us get where we, I think, as a whole want to see improvement, make things better, help the populace, whatever it is. Would you be able to kind of throw a quick comment to that end across the panel?
Are you asking if he took democracy for all its flaws but made some kind of change to improve it relatively? Is that what you're talking about?
In your best analysis, yes.
If we're stuck with democracy, personally, I think one of the most massive improvements you could make is anyone whose income depends on the government should not have any voting capability. One of the problems with So that would mean the bureaucracy, politicians, welfare bums, so to speak, they should not have any say in governance or how resources are allocated. I think that would make a huge difference in and of itself. And it kind of just goes to a broader point where the general idea with democracy is, well, it's better if more people are involved. But as the suffrage right has expanded over time, whether it's mere correlation or if there's a causation here, I'd say the latter is certainly true. As the franchise has expanded, generally that's been associated with bigger government, more oppressive government, more expensive government, more social programs, all these kind of negative things that people in a room like this would be opposed to. So, back in a time, republic meant you were a property owning person and you had a say. There was nothing like, oh, make the 16-year-olds, they need to vote too. Or, the quote unquote parasite class should not have a say in anything. Their vote should be cut off. I think if you're stuck with that system, that would be a huge improvement.
I think with regards to medicine, if we could go back to an earlier concept around insurance that is really meant for the poor and the destitute, who should not have to suffer with no medical care, but we are doing the opposite now, where we have an increasing proportion of our citizenry in the United States is now insured by the government. The quality of healthcare is inversely proportional to the government's involvement in providing that healthcare. So as the Medicare and the Medicaid rolls go up, the wages of doctors, nurses, and quality decline. So we're going in the opposite direction. So if we could get back to a system where we recognize that there are some people, disabled children, for example, who were born disabled, should have a special dispensation from our society because it's cruel to do otherwise. But we now have rather large numbers of able-bodied people who are getting lavish government benefits, and it's degrading the entire system. So I would want to roll it back to a much earlier concept that we are now 60 years away from.
Can I just add one thing? Going back to Mr. Reeder's comment, which was excellent. FDR said that public employee unions were an abomination, and they are. They should be banned as part of, disenfranchising the parasite class. But the real problem is in the character of the people. You have Mitt Romney, who made a distinction between the makers and the takers. That, by the way, is a distinction that the founding fathers were deeply concerned about. They were deeply concerned about the takers ganging up on the makers. And he was roundly ridiculed in the mainstream media for even making that distinction. So when you have a country where you cannot even tell the truth about who's productive versus, who is a sponge, what hope is there? We have to be able to get back to that kind of plain speaking and personal responsibility, and I don't know how to get there.
They probably need a mic again if it's around. Otherwise, who was your separate up? Thanks very much. Yeah, it's good to have some expertise with the American medical system here. I'm from Canada, obviously. So anyways, there's been a lot of debate in Canada around the single-payer health system we have here, and it's non-functional. I mean, it's free medical care if you survive long enough to get to the front of the line. And so, I'm not kidding you. It's true. The wait times are horrible. People die every day for lack of medical care. So anyways, what the question arises, what's better? And I perceive issues with the American medical insurance getting in the way. And we could probably agree on Medicare in Canada and the U.S. as being, not well administered by the government. The government seems to mess things up. But the alternative in the U.S. would seem to be private insurance. And is that the way to go? Or the British model better, with a two-tiered system? If we were to replace, the medical system in Canada, what should we do?
Utopia ain't going to happen. But I think the Northern European countries have figured out some models for private insurance where there is competition and quality, while at the same time the government does provide a safety net. But it's very clear that the safety net insurance just is not as good as the private insurance models that are offered. And I think that's what I would advocate going back to, because these monopolies in the United States, are partly, I guess, propped up by the same system that gave us Medicare. So a single payer system is an abomination. That is what we're heading towards, despite the example of our northern neighbor and the United Kingdom, which is also a widely acknowledged disaster. But if we could have sort of two tiers, safety net, catastrophic insurance for the uninsured and for those who, through no fault of their own, are simply not capable of ever working because they were born disabled, and then a private insurance market for everybody else. And make it clear that if you don't have private insurance, you're not going to get very good medical care. That's just a fact. It's also a way of getting people to go back to work. So we have a rather large and growing indolent population of men, especially, who will say things to me as a doctor like, "Tell me, Mr. White, what sort of work do you do?" "I don't work."
This question's for Rick. To me, investing is as much a pursuit about self-realization as it is about financial discipline. In your view, how can individuals achieve self-realization when a society tends to reward conformity?
I guess you answered your own question. It's sort of up to you. From my point of view, you get ahead as an investor or you get ahead of as a business person by either as a business person generating more utility than you consume, or as an investor aligning yourself with institutions that generate more utility than they consume. I'm not, as you know, a broad-based investor. I do natural resources and conventional financial services. I do them because I understand both of those industries very well. I do them because at 72, I've had experience stepping out of my area of expertise and getting spanked. And I got sick of getting spanked. you know? So I would suspect that as an investor, you confine yourself to something that you're interested enough in that you develop the expertise to outcompete most of the competitors investing in your sector. I have known, not personally, perhaps by observation, some superb investors who are able to invest in multiple sectors. Warren Buffett would be an example. I've come to learn I'm not that smart. And so from my own point of view, this is a bad example, but kind of like being in a fight as a kid. In your own backyard, you can probably take the other guy on. In his backyard, you're in real trouble. And I would suggest as a business person that you emulate that. You do something that you're so passionate about that you can deliver more utility than your competitor. And the same thing as an investor. I would also say in the circumstance that you've chosen, natural resources, and I'm not going to talk about other industries, in resources, two more things. In capital-intensive cyclical businesses, you're going to be a contrarian or you're going to be a victim. Those are your two choices. It's better to choose being a contrarian. The second thing, because you're young, and I think you learned this the last cycle, everything takes longer than you think it's going to take. If you think you're going to get the answer to an unanswered question in 9 months or something like that, you still believe in a tooth fairy. The great success stories in investing have all been about compounding. And compounding takes time. Young people, despite the fact they have a lot of time left on earth, they're very impatient. And old guys like me with much less time on earth, strangely, are much more patient.
Clayton, this one's for you. I was told, so I voted PPC in the last federal election, and I was told that my decision wasn't very strategic or smart because the odds of PPC becoming something of, I'm not even sure how to be polite about it, but a significance, let's say, is low. And so my vote would be better put, let's say, with Polyev, because it would be the lesser of the evils in terms of what aligns to the personality. So I guess the main question is strategic, or do you align your vote towards what you believe in?
Oh man, that the thing is, in Canada, federal politics, people want to make it out as their savior, but you can't really vote your way out of the problem with Ottawa necessarily. So there is a sense where, sending a message or more of a principled vote that counts. I think, it is tough for small parties, obviously, and you want to support something that aligns more with you. In my personal opinion, I think like a lot of Democratic activity is more functional at the local level. Especially like I speak from an Alberta perspective, and we don't really have a lot of influence in federal politics just because of the numbers game. You're kind of just along for the ride. But, there could be some value, obviously, in, think about the way the Liberals and the NDP would work together. So and I'm not saying this necessarily would work PPC and Conservative, but what happened with the Liberals and the NDP is the NDP kind of fed things to the Liberals that they would kind of crowd out the more quote unquote extreme version of their side of the spectrum. So in a sense, like if PPC, even if they didn't win, for example, and say you're a PPC supporter, but say they got enough numbers where they can't be ignored by a more mainstream party, would they have to, steal some ideas? And would that create some kind of positive effect? I mean, that kind of thing could happen, I suppose. I don't have a clear answer for what you should do. I mean, I think it's like Lysander Spooner said, when it comes to voting, everyone's it's like people thrown into the battlefield fighting each other in conscription, and you're just trying to defend yourself the best you can. So it's always a case by case thing, whether it's strategic. But the thing is, even if you voted Conservative because you think they have a better chance, the Canadian Conservative Party is really, really bad. It's basically 99% liberal stuff. So again, conservatism is progressivism going the speed limit. The Polyev conservatives are really just, a few inches behind the liberals on a lot of things.
This is a question for Rick. You've created a great amount of wealth for yourself and for others. Beyond financial outcomes, how do you define success in life?
Simply, I guess, being... Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Nope. Okay. Wealth is, I think, enhancing your sense of well-being. Some of that is financial. Money's good for the nerves. But I think earning the respect of your community and those who know you and being happy, simply being happy, is a bunch of wealth.
That's a general question, like, I don't know, we have, say, 7-8 more minutes. Almost 78. 7. No, not 78 more minutes.
So this is a general question. So whoever, if there's somebody who feels they want to answer this, what's the one area you think the Liberty Movement is wrong? Something we need to rethink?
I can try that. Well, if you're talking about libertarians, I guess that's a good surrogate for the Liberty Movement, right? I think it was also Kirk, one of the main mid 20th century American conservatives, wrote an essay where he called libertarians the chirping sectaries. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. But the modern version of that is libertarianism is really for white guys with a 125 IQ. And for everybody else, it just doesn't work out as billed. I think that the social conservatives have a lot to offer. That doesn't necessarily require government action, but I think it does require government support. It does require the government at least not being unfriendly towards or undermining traditional institutions, traditional mores, and ideas, that sort of thing. A perfect example, and this wouldn't necessarily contradict the libertarian, program, is sex education in the schools. When I was in public school, elementary school, high school, the word sex was never mentioned. I asked people my age, in your public school on Long Island, was the word sex ever mentioned? No, I never heard it. Right? And now, of course, it's all over the place. I think that respects parental authority, parental responsibility, the division of responsibility between the government and the private sector, the fact that sex education simply had no presence in the schools. It wasn't seen as in their wheelhouse or part of their purview. That's in support of a socially conservative agenda. And I think that is a positive thing. I think the government should be much more pro-marriage than it is, much more pro-natalist than it is. All of that should not be agnostic about these things. Doesn't mean that the laws should change necessarily. Well, we should get rid of civil rights protections for LGBTQ and transgender people, but, we should dial down the civil rights laws in general. So I think social conservatism is an important movement, and libertarianism doesn't really recognize that.
This was a big thing this is something that libertarians have to really grapple with, and it's like the preconditions of liberty. Like, do you set people free and they become better, or do better people, are they going to be more libertarian? It's like, that's what kind of capitalism and morality is about, preconditions for liberty. And you need, Hans Hermann Hoppe said this in an essay, about on conservatism and libertarianism. He said, from the conservative standpoint, their values are basically taxed or punished by the government, and the opposite, like opposite family values or traditional values, those are punished. So he said, a conservative person should be a libertarian, but a libertarian should also be a conservative person because of Max's original slogan or what have you with the PPC, it linked liberty and responsibility together, which I thought was really important, because there's the more left libertarian, libertine type. They just want to kind of do whatever, but they don't understand like the character that's required. Libertarians have been grappling with this culture issue a lot and what's required for people making it possible to have a free society. And that's still a question that's panning out here, but that's the big thing. The libertarian movement needs to think about like the character required to have a free society. It doesn't just happen.
Well, I should add that the founding fathers said, well, they were talking about democracy, but a fairly libertarian democracy. They said this system is only suitable to a virtuous people. That's all. We have to have that predicate of a virtuous people before we can have a viable, free society, by which they meant largely small government, libertarian. And, they just kind of assumed, it's like, assume a can opener. I mean, assume a virtuous society.
Yeah. Well, I've asked some of you this question individually, but I thought I would maybe ask the panel. The reason I came to this event is because of the title. I'm looking for work right now, and I've had a few sort of hit and runs with working for businesses that initially seemed like they were great, and then I would suddenly realize I'd kind of climbed aboard a sinking ship because the people leading the company weren't acting ethically or with, certain level of integrity or morality. So I wondered if anybody on the panel wanted to, and this includes you, Brian, wanted to give me some pointers on how do you vet companies as much as they're vetting you for dependability and integrity in the way that they're going to operate, especially in the case where the chips are down and there's a lawsuit or there's cash flow issues. How do you tell that somebody's going to behave ethically in those difficult situations?
Happy to try that. Yeah. I think what you're talking about as a young person looking for a career is precisely what happens to investors. Precisely. You're just thinking about investing your time because you don't have any money. But the process is identical. I think that you yourself probably by now have enough common sense and probably know enough people, as an example, in the mining business, that if you looked at a company and you asked the person interviewing you what the company's value proposition was, what their opportunities were, and what their challenges were, and you asked people within your circle if that board of directors had enough expertise, given the task at hand, to make it work, that you could come up with an answer. There's probably 3,000 companies in the worldwide that purport to be in the mining business or in the exploration business. I would suggest that 2,500 of the 3,000 are valueless. That is to say, they're worth nothing. But I would suggest, too, that the process by which you differentiate the 500 survivors from the lame, the halt, and the blind is very straightforward. And if you think about the fact that you're going to invest your career the same way that I would talk about investing my money, that the process is pretty straightforward. It's all about the people involved. Have the people involved identified the task at hand? What is the task at hand? How much money will it take? How much money do you have? And do you have the expertise, both in terms of management and on the board, that I should care about the task at hand that you've identified? Do you know something about the specific topic that you're going about? Those are the questions I ask. But once again, self-serving, I would point you to the rural classroom. I teach you how to ask those questions.
Okay, that's it.